So then the challenge is, well, if there's another million people here every 3 years, they're going to be competing for the real estate, which is affordable, investable, and livable. And 3 years after that, another million people. And 3 years after that, another million people. So the affordable, investable, and livable zone is ultimately hot property. Welcome to the Urban Property Investor. I'm your host, Sam Saggers, here to help you crack the code of real estate wealth. Today's show, we're going to dig into demographics, have a good old-fashioned chat as to where solid demand's going to be in the Australian property market over the next decade and into the next decade. Spatial change, spatial transformation, it's a big way to analyze real estate, and today I want to get into what that looks like and how it's going to meet one of the big structural shifts moving forward in Australian real estate, the great transformation of intergenerational wealth. Let's talk demographics. Welcome back, of course, my regular listeners, you urban property investor, good folk. Thank you for choosing me to listen about real estate from. I don't even know if that was English. Was that English? To listen from real estate from? No, I don't know. But hey, let's continue on. And of course, if it's your first time tuning into the show, play the program in double speed, get your life back. You can speed me up. And I have done a lot of episodes, so feel free to dart about, go back in time. But hey, look, let's have a good chat about really being a property investor and really aligning some investment strategies around where demographics are going to improve, where demographics are going to shift. And I think today in real estate, it's incredibly challenging to find really good, affordable real estate. And really the honeypot, if you like, is getting harder and harder to find. What we want as a property investor is something that meets our budget, but ultimately there is a diminishing level because of aggregate demand of opportunity. So we need to be on our toes. That's the first lesson, I think, today. You can't really sit on the fence for too long. You can dart about for maximum 12 months in real estate, but really thereafter, you've got to make some moves. And Australia's ultimately got a very, very tight labour market. It's virtually no unemployment, even though the Reserve Bank's trying to create a little bit of unemployment through the cash rate place. Ultimately, we are living in a time where for a long time there will be sub 5% unemployment, one would think. Now, you're in trouble if you don't start to make moves. That's my really thought process around Australian real estate. Oxford Economics has come out with some pretty incredible house price and unit price forecasts up until 2027. Openly suggesting that the property market will rise in value to the point where, for example, a Sydney median house price home, which is already high at 1.369, by 2027 could reach $1.93 million. That's a huge amount of money to be gained in the next 3 years. So really, are we actually still in a very much a boom phase? Well, I've been open in saying that we ultimately are, but it's been led by the rise in rents. And of course, smarter people than me, Oxford Economics has come out and said, well, no, it's not only going to be the rise in rents, that will be followed by a further rise in property values. And this will take, the median house price of Melbourne to 1.28 from 915, Brisbane 1.21 from 895. And then over in the unit space, it doesn't get much better if you're going to sit on the fence. In a Melbourne apartment, it's a really good value at the moment at 612 median unit price. By 2027, that is reported by PropTrack and Oxford Economics Australia to hit 780. So virtually $200,000 in an apartment down in Melbourne to be made. And so these are incredible numbers, folks, incredible numbers. And again, I think we need to understand a little bit about, there is a demographic shift happening right now, and there is a real set of fundamentals which probably are very favorable to some of this data coming together. And even if 50% of that report was correct, it's still a big spike in possible capital growth. So there's kind of three parts to the puzzle: what Australia wants, what Australia will do, what you can actually physically buy and afford to buy, and what the overall aggregate demand will do and buy. It's kind of the three levers out in the market: what Australia's doing, what Australia's business plan is, if you like, what you can do to join into that business plan with your budget, and what the rest of society will ultimately do with their money, and will that link to how to buy real estate. Really, that's the point of today's show. And I think makes a lot of sense to me. If we know where aggregate demand is going to buy, and we are part of that aggregate demand, we're going to catch the wave. We're going to catch the wave. Now, if we look at past policies, really to why we're here, why we're at this nexus point of ultimately less affordability in the market, obviously rents spiraling out of control. You have to go back. APRA restricted a lot of landlords entering the market over sort of 2017, 2018, 2019, that whole Royal Commission era, kind of chased off property investors who are landlords. Then we've had things like government sort of intervening and creating annoying regulations, which people don't like. People don't like to be sort of government-led in the real estate space. Landlords are going to be told they need to, provide better air conditioning, provide better sustainability mechanisms to their real estate. And of course, that has chased a few people out of the space through building code changes. Now, I'm very open about it. I don't want any part of building code changes, so I'm avoiding that through making sure I'm not having to retrofit my real estate through building code changes by generally following modern real estate, which already has building code changes kind of built into it. But that's the past, and we're here now. Things ain't changing, so we're moving forward. We're always moving forward. So the medium term, next 10 years, really, it's a game of density. Where will the people go? Where will the populace head to? And whereafter into the 2030s, where will the planning instruments create a affordable, more cohesive society? And over the long term, it's where is the land going to be released? What will happen to trades and workers, and will the robots take everyone's jobs? And where will infrastructure improvement be? So I'm a big fan of finding the land where the infrastructure is going to improve, and obviously linking that to also where demographics are going to shift into that space. And of course, Australia's business plan, population plan, is to continue to grow its populace. And today, we're a fast growing country. Fast, like so much growth when it comes to new people. And of course, not everyone likes that. Not everyone's a big fan of new people coming into the system. But a place like Sydney will grow by, 23% more people within the next 15 years. So it's no wonder we're going to see house prices continue to rise if you're just simply putting more people into the system yet not building enough product, you're just simply going to always have this supply and demand challenge. So obviously there's the anti-population group, and really the context around that is, slow down the rising prices in housing, create a more socially cohesive society, make it easier for people to rent, obviously allow the people here to enjoy a larger share of GDP per capita, essentially not have those bottlenecks going to the doctor and being the 40th person in line in the waiting room, only be the 10th. That's really the argument, I guess, around that side. And there's some validity to that argument. Is Australia really growing its population base but diminishing its per capita, enjoyment of everything? And the opposite, though, and of course, property investors kind of need to back higher population, because ultimately it does become a economic benefit rather than a social benefit or a GDP per capita benefit to people in the system. But ultimately, population base grows jobs, grows the economy, grows taxes, should link to more consumer demand. You put more consumers in your system, there's more demand effectively. And again, like if you want to buy shares, I'm a big believer in shares linking to population growth. You can buy shares in food, or you can buy shares in energy, or you can all are consumers of stuff, shares in infrastructure projects, because that's really Australia's business plan. Now, it's very important to understand what Australia wants, because it allows you to see the kind of overarching map of what is going on. And really the triple boost is the plan, which is a rising population base, rising level of work and rising incomes. Now, I've mentioned this before, but the average wage will go from $96,000 at the end of 2023 to $132,000 by the end of 2033. There's a lot of reasons why, and I want to sort of dig into why the wages will grow and why you want longevity investments for your wealth creation. So let's talk about income growth. The first thing we need to understand is we are living in a period of the millennial, the demographic that is really the largest cohort today is the millennial demographic. In fact, the most populous age group today is 32 years of age, of where there are today 400,000 Australians. So you put two 32-year-olds together, you're going to get fireworks. There's going to be a lot of jiggy-wiggy. There's going to be a lot of, let's face it, shagging. And that'll lead to marriages, that'll lead to babies, and that will lead to effectively a little baby boom. And the millennials are really in charge of the homegrown production of children. And of course, why does that link to income growth? Well, first we need to understand that the fact that our largest cohort of human beings are having children is going to mean they're going to fluctuate in the workforce through their next 10 to 15 year period. So you got the largest workforce, which is the millennial, all having children. And of course, that means for some of the mums and dads, they have to spend time out of the workforce actually raising their children, or they're part-timing into the workforce, or they're actually in certain jobs where, they can sort of work from home and perhaps sort of, work with the kids as best as they can. But all of that creates a little bit of a productivity issue. And of course, where there's productivity gaps, there is skill gaps or shortages in industry. And really the fact that the millennial is simply the largest workforce in Australia, and they're the ones required to do the work, but they're all having kids, is ultimately going to create a skills gap, and that to replace that skills gap, you're getting this migration factor coming into the system. And arguably, the migration system probably isn't addressing right now what kind of skills we ultimately need. And of course, that is also offsetting that right now it's pretty hard to recruit people. And in Australian real estate, the biggest challenge to Australian real estate is generally high unemployment. So we're in a low unemployment rate, and really that's going to address the next decade of wage growth, because you're effectively with this millennial cohort that is now fluctuating in and out of the workforce. And of course, that means people were probably going to have to pay more for the right human being, and we'll start to see wage growth. So we know the next 10 years there will be actually wage growth, whereas the previous 10 years wage growth was less of a thing, because the millennials, were productive. Now we're actually going to a rather unproductive period of the millennial worker. And of course, that's going to lead to shortages. And really, as the next decade unfolds, I would suggest we're going to see an even higher price paid for tradies. It's going to be hard to get those renovations complete. There's going to be a lot of push costs on inflation when it comes to, the getting tradies onto jobs. And I say that as in, like, the job needs to be meaningful for the tradie, or it's going to be very difficult to get trades. They're not going to want the silly little jobs that quite often, the small little renovator market may have. And so there's going to be a premium put on that. So I think to counter the fact that you're delving into that space, you need longevity assets. Things that, and what I mean by longevity assets, it's just not functionally obsolete real estate where you're going to have to rely on trades to prop it up. I wouldn't do it to yourself. I would just go into the already renovated, or, if it's a project, do a renovation, but otherwise, try and stick to the modern end of town so you're not faced with the imposition of getting trades to do small scale renovations. They will really charge you through the roof. I recently offloaded an asset to upgrade to another asset, and I got basically some trades on just upgrading the asset. And I mean, it's not cheap. It's not cheap. So obviously Australia's got its fair share of affordability problems. A little bit of that is to do with where the interest rate is today. That will soften eventually and increase the level of affordability in the marketplace. But really the second part of the puzzle is, if we know what Australia wants to do, bring more people here, help wages rise because of the demographic of the millennial, then we know that there's going to be a healthy jobs market, and we know the landscape is kind of pro-property. So then the challenge is, well, if there's another million people here every 3 years, they're going to be competing for the real estate, which is affordable, investable, and livable. And 3 years after that, another million people, and 3 years after that, another million people. So the affordable, investable, and livable zone is ultimately hot property. And obviously there are versions of those zones out in space. And so for me as a property investor, I'm wanting to see where the spatial demand is going to be its greatest. But again, if we're looking for the right real estate, there's going to be criteria behind that. The reality is, real estate moving forward, we need to look for where the demand's going to be, but also where the asset selection is going to be strongest and the location selection is going to be the strongest. So we want these suburbs which basically people want to live in and also locals want to stay in. We want this kind of over-demand effect that is plausible in real estate. But also equally, we need to go and find affordable, tightly held markets. It's kind of an oxymoron. We need to find affordable, tight rental markets, affordable suburbs with tight rental markets. Again, it's a little bit of an oxymoron, but it can be done. We need to find affordable, liquid marketplaces where days on market are very, very light. Instead of 90 days on market, 22 days on market. But anything with 22 days on market is in high demand. And so again, you have these challenges as a property investor, as a property selector, where you're looking for liquid real estate, but ultimately have an illiquid budget, which is a budgetary constraint. And of course, you need to find a suburb where the median price is at a certain threshold for your budget, which again, for a lot of property investors, the median price of real estate is actually above their budget. And so you can see the challenges. You're not only fighting the challenge of Australia's business plan, but you're also challenged by the fact that as an investor, there are budgetary constraints quite often. And of course, you need to go and find an affordable, investable, livable suburb with high growth prospects. Again, it's doable, but it's not easy. It's not easy. And you then have to go and find an investable, livable place where the livability of that area is so good, it's going to attract people and retain people. And of course, that means low crime rate, that means available to amenities, that means walkable suburb, that means good schools, good green space, public transport, shopping centres and healthcare facilities, and a high unemployment rate, which is better than really the state's average. So a lot to be done in that space, a lot to be done. And again, I think sometimes when it comes to property investment, it's getting harder. It's not getting easier. It was a lot easier 20 years ago. It's hard. And I say that because I think, you're as a property investor, if you haven't bought or you're updating or upgrading your portfolio, it's time to move because it's just going to get harder. And again, if that Oxford economics report's worth a grain of salt, prices could get carried away and then it's a lockout. So we are living in the millennial economy, and I like to explore what aggregate demand will buy. And if aggregate demand, the overall higher level of demand is millennial base, what do millennials actually want to buy? And of course, today I'm a big fan of millennial neighborhoods, whether it's that cool inner city cafe for the cafe district, those place economy districts for the cool kids. But for the most part, the millennial neighborhoods today are going to be those 3 and 4 bedroom housing communities. Why? Because millennials are having children. And because they're having children means they're starting families. And generally, when you start a family, you kind of are looking for a bit more space. 1 bedroom unit's not going to cut it. And so for a lot of the millennial economy, they are going to different spaces. So what is the space they're looking for? Spatial demographic change. Now, the 2020s, if you like, the next 10 years is going to be millennials drifting to affordable outer suburbs and gentrifying those affordable outer suburbs. Hence why I'm actually a big fan of those future suburban areas with great infrastructure, great community involvement, community-led outer suburbs. I think they're going to do very, very well because the overall aggregate demand and the fact that 3 and 4 bedroom houses are going to be in high demand means those areas are going to ultimately do very, very well because they mirror up with where society is at and whereby the largest populace is. And so if you think about middle ring suburbs or inner ring suburbs, they are expensive today. And again, if you're starting a family, you probably can't afford to buy a house 5 k's from a major capital city. Would be even more difficult 15 k's from a major capital city because typically those house prices are 1.5 to 5, 6, $7 million. And so if you've got a young new family, you're just simply priced out of those marketplaces. And so the outer areas are going to be very, very popular and they're going to continue to be popular. They're already popular. And so if you think your Sydneys, your Melbournes, your Brisbanes, your Perths, your Adelaides, there is gold in the outer suburbs. Now, I'm also a realist. Some of the outer suburbs, some of the areas in the outer suburbs won't make great investment areas. So you need to have a very good property selection criteria and new suburb selection criteria on the outer edge. But the millennials are pouring in, and eventually, if we fast forward to 2030, what's going to happen is the great wealth intergenerational transformation. The baby boomers that own the middle suburban areas with large $3-4 million homes are obviously going to reach their maximum life journey and start to pass away. And of course, this is going to create a densification concept of the middle suburban realm of Australia. Typically, we've had in those middle suburban areas a lot of NIMBYs living, and those NIMBYs tend to be much older Australians, baby boomers in their 60s, 70s, lots of time on their hands to be a NIMBY. Whereas the YIMBYs, yes, in my backyard, would love to live in middle, those really infrastructure rich, efficient areas 15 kilometres from our major cities. And they're happy to live in more like terrace, townhome, 3-4 bedroom houses, but much smaller product than what is currently, in existence. And really, if you go into those sort of middle areas today, they are, much older homes for the most part, built in the 60s and 70s. Really, if you fast forward to when the baby boomers die out, you've got this massive inter-transformation of wealth. And what is likely to happen is the millennial, which is parked in the outer suburb, will see property values rise in the outer suburbs. We'll go into the outer suburbs with not a lot of wealth in the 2020s, with government grants, with small deposits, with first homeowner schemes. Ultimately, get an uplift on value of their house, their 3 or 4 bedroom house in the outer suburbs, 30, 40 kilometres from the city. Probably make in that decade a sort of $300,000 odd gain from their house. And then you'll start to see the middle suburban area open up through effectively the die out of the baby boomer and the buyout of their family home with an instrument from town planning around densifying the middle suburban area. And what we will see is the ability for the $4 million house to become 6 high-quality townhomes, terrace homes in our middle suburbs. And again, what you'll then see is the millennial going, well, I can now afford it because I can upgrade because I've got a larger deposit. Because the middle suburban ring is dissected and a $4 million house is now 6 $1.5 million luxury looking townhouses with a smaller kind of footprint, you'll get the actual YIMBY coming back to the middle in the 2030s. The YIMBY is now being sent out. If you ask any millennial today, they would love a great townhome in middle suburbia. They don't need a large family home, even though they've got kids. They would happily have a 4-bedroom townhouse product, 15 Ks from the city if they could reach the price point. They're going to be able to afford that and they'll end up coming back. So the millennials will upgrade to ex-baby boomer stock, whether it's going to be the $4 million home because the millennials done very well economically, or whether it's a smaller version of the $4 million home, a $2 million version or a $1.5 million version. So that's ultimately what's happening. And of course, the inner ring today and into the future is now becoming a very alpha luxury part of society. You're typically getting, today developments in Brisbane's 5-kilometre radius or Sydney's 5-kilometre radius of the CBD. Melbourne's, like, the square meter rate on those luxury apartments is mind-boggling. Like Sydney's at 100,000 a metre in those areas. So that becomes a high-end luxury playground. You'll also obviously have a little bit of, student product in the CBDs. But for the most part, the inner ring becomes luxury. The middle ring in 2030 gets redeveloped. And the outer ring today is where the large pool of aggregate demand from the millennial is. And that's the way it's unfolding. And of course, you can have a look at a regional city like a Newcastle, a Toowoomba. Some of these regional markets are also going to be the beneficiary of Australia's business plan. Now, you could argue for every sort of 2 to 3 people that will be drawn to Australia and end up living in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane, there will equally be as many people, if not a tad more, going to regional Australia as the Australian government goes, well, we probably could grow Toowoomba a lot with a lot more jobs. We could grow Newcastle with a lot more people. Let's take the pressure off Sydney a little bit and send some people up to the Central Coast and or Newcastle. So you often get regional migration schemes through the visa system, having people sort of go to those marketplaces equally as well. But it's fair to say in the 2020s, there really is no 3-ring system to a city when you go to Toowoomba, when you go to a regional city, Geelong, etc. There's no real outer area, if you like, because you can drive through the city in 20 minutes. So you can be from the middle of downtown to the outer area within sort of 15 minutes most of the time. So buying on the edge of a regional city is going to also be a drive to this affordability by the millennial. And of course, they may feel like they're on the outer edge of that regional city, but by 2030, 2040, that outer edge will indeed actually become the middle ring of that regional area. Now, certain regional areas I'm a big fan of, and quite often I don't even know why we use the word regional. I never feel like Newcastle's a regional city to me. It's massive. It's got an airport. It's 600,000 people. Gold Coast considered a regional marketplace. That doesn't make sense to me. I mean, Gold Coast is the second most expensive Australian real estate market behind Sydney. But it's considered regional. So I don't know. Maybe it's just me who has a problem with that one. But ultimately, what we're going to see is this spatial transformation meeting a wealth transformation. And really what that is aggregate demand meeting structural shift, a structural economic, positive tsunami coming together. It's like two tectonic plates meeting each other. And so a little tip today, if you're an investor, don't underestimate adding to your portfolio a 3 or 4 bedroom dwelling in the outer suburbs in a high quality, very high quality, livable outer suburb. And of course, those middle ring areas are going to be hot property later in the decade once again. And I think owning a piece of that is very, very powerful as well, with that inner ring area today becoming also a little bit more luxury. So good signs ahead. If you want to follow the millennial economy, then that's where they're headed. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. Thanks for your time today. I'll leave it there today. Leave me a review. Feel free to leave a review so we can do it all again next week. All right, folks, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Property Investor. To never miss an episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on your favorite app or on YouTube. I would love it if you could give the show a rating and share it with your friends and family. In between episodes, you can always keep in touch with me by connecting on social media over Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. Until we meet again on the next episode of the Urban Property Investor, take care and bye for now.